Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Book Talks with Yo. My name is Yoanna and today I'm going to talk about my favorite editing tips. Jeez, so NaNoWriMo is already over? And this was one crazy month. I'm so happy and so proud with my draft. Although I do realize that there is still a lot of work to be done before this novel is good enough for anyone else but me to see. And yeah, let me know down in the comments how did Nano go for you this year, and I really hope you enjoyed the experience no matter how many words you got in. But after writing the first draft comes my absolutely favorite part, which is editing. I really love editing. Sometimes even more than the first draft and writing the first draft, to be honest. But yeah, I know that some people actually dread editing, and this is why today I'm sharing with you some of my favorite editing tips that will hopefully make the process more pleasant for you as well. So without further ado, let's get into the video. The first thing I want to mention is one that I believe is very important, and this is to take a short break after you finish writing your draft and before starting your revisions or edits. I know that you might be very excited and eager to start editing, I do, but you will actually be counterproductive if you don't take a short break after you finish writing the manuscript. This might be 2 weeks, this might be a month, it's different for everyone, but please make it at least longer than a week, because if you give yourself a break, you are more likely to do better edits after this. Because if you go straight from writing to editing, you're not looking at your novel with fresh eyes, you haven't given your mind time to recharge and think of new ideas, and you're more likely to miss out on important edits that need to be done. My second tip is to make sure you know the difference between novel revisions and the different types of editing, and you also need to come to terms with the fact that you cannot do them all in the same time, and you will probably have to go through a couple of rounds of edits before it is polished. 4 years ago, when I finished my first novel, I thought, yeah, great, now I just have to go back and correct a few mistakes, add a couple of sentences, and then I'll be done. But yeah, in reality, I had to go through five? Yeah, I think it was 5 rounds of edits, and I still see things that I need to polish, that I want to correct when I'm looking at my manuscript, which is totally normal. But yeah, now let's talk about novel revisions and the different types of edits, so you can make a clear distinction and see how a typical editing process might go. Firstly, let's talk about what a novel revision is. This is all about rewriting and making your first draft or zero draft the way you actually wanted it to be. Or in other words, when you were writing your first draft, you were building the skeleton of your story, and now it is time to flesh it out in the revision process. A good advice for revision would be to write a short summary of each chapter before you start revising, so you know which chapters are finished and have purpose and which ones need more work on. You can also make some notes for each chapter about what are the descriptions and expositions there, what is the way they contribute to overall to the plot, and just different things like this that you need to go back and check or correct sometimes. And another good thing that you might do during the revision process is remind yourself all the details about your characters, so you can check whether you've done all the characterizations throughout the novel in a proper way. This leads us to the first type of editing that I want to talk about in this video, and this is the story editing. This is pretty much an in-depth manuscript edit that works on the structure of the novel, the characters, the setting, and just the plot overall. And another way to call it would be a developmental editing. And firstly, you need to look at your plot. For example, is it believable and engaging? Do the scenes flow logically and naturally, maintaining momentum? Have you tied up all subplots and major plot threads? Because you don't want to introduce us to something to some subplot, for example, something happening to one of your more important side characters at the middle of the novel, and then not address it or resolve it by the end, because this just won't be satisfying for the reader and they will question what is happening. As well as that, this is a good point to look at plot holes, because that might spoil your novel. Then look at your characters. Are they believable? Do they have an authentic voice and clear strengths, weaknesses, goals and motivations? Do they sound believable and natural? And look at every story arc that you have, character story arc, and see whether they are finished, clear and intriguing to the reader. I've talked about building strong characters in a separate video, so you might want to check that out. Then after this, look at the themes you explore in your novel and look how those are developed and whether there is a better way to do so. Look also at your central conflict. This is pretty much the thing that is driving your plot forwards, and see whether it's clear and intriguing throughout the story and whether it is resolved by the end. Look if you've used any foreshadowing for that conflict or for the resolution at the end, and if you haven't, is this a good moment to go back and add some? Maybe it is. And lastly, look at your dialogues and see whether they are natural and realistic. I'm not going to talk much about dialogues here because I have a separate video addressing writing good dialogues, so you might want to check that one out as well. Now, only after we've done a thorough revision and developmental editing of our novel, we can proceed to align and copy editing. This pretty much is the time when you're going to go back at your text and look for a few things. One of them is the sensory details. In other words, go back and check whether you've used all the senses, as many of the senses as possible when describing a scene, like smell, touch, sight, and etc. etc. And this is also a good time to go back and check whether you've used enough body language when describing emotions, or in other words, whether you've showed enough and not told the reader too much. And another good thing here is to avoid repetitions and make sure you're not making your characters do repetitive things. Because, for example, if your characters sighs or rolls their eyes every 5 seconds, chances are it will annoy the reader. One key thing when you're making your copy edits is to make sure you're not using too many adverbs, especially not in the dialogue tags. Because let's look at this sentence, for example. Why did you do that? Said John angrily. This is one sentence. And now let's look at another one. John groaned and clenched his jaw and said, why did you do that? Now, it's clear, the distinction between the two sentences is clear, and you can pretty much see how better the second sentence sounds, and it is a good advice to follow when writing dialogues. It is not something I always follow, I admit, but it is something I generally try to stick to. And another place you need to make sure you are not overusing adverbs is in the combination of a weak verb plus adverb. For example, it is one thing to say he ran quickly, and it is a very different thing to use a strong verb like sprinted and say he sprinted. It just automatically makes the sentence better. As well as that, don't use overly complicated language, because that usually doesn't fit the story and ruins the flow. For example, no need to say in his near vicinity when you can just say near. And overly complicated words are not going to make your work seem smart or whatever. They're most likely going to annoy the reader. And a good way to check whether you've used overly complicated language when you're writing is to read your work aloud and see whether you're stumbling upon some sentences or finding them hard and boring to read. Another thing you would want to do when you're making the copy edits is to try and make sure you've used active voice instead of passive one when this is possible. Generally speaking, it is a lot better to use the active one if the sentence allows that. And one of the last things that you would like to check for in doing your copy edits would be to make sure you have a good mixture of pronouns, nouns, and names. Because and it would be annoying for the reader if you start 10 consequent sentences with he or she did X and Y. My next advice would be to find critique partners or fellow writers and better readers, because usually other people will notice things that you probably missed when you were editing, and they can give you another perspective and another point of view on your work. Try asking them whether they can make some notes while they're reading your work and, for example, say what they like, what they think can be improved, and so on. And if you have 2 or 3 better readers, try gathering all the feedback and then analyze it, but not emotionally. Don't attach emotions to this. Do it objectively and then start editing, keeping their notes in the front of your mind. And another thing, if you're writing about LGBTQ plus characters or characters struggling with depression or eating disorder or some other illness or disorder, and if they have some disability or they're from a different race, different culture, different religion, that you just characters that represent things that you are not part of or you're not familiar with from firsthand, try finding sensitive readers. What sensitive readers are is basically people who represent those groups, so they can help you make your characters believable and realistic, and will help you avoid cliches and toxic stereotypes. And my last advice can be used at pretty much all of the stages of editing and revising, and this is to print out your work in a different font than the one you wrote it in. Usually, when you print it out, you will spot some mistakes and typos that you wouldn't have otherwise on your laptop. And the point of making it in a different font is that when you've spent so much time writing this story, your eyes have gotten used to seeing it, and sometimes they automatically finish the sentences. And if you print it in another font, they will see it as something new, and you'll be more likely to spot all those annoying typos. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up today's video. Please remember that the editing process is very similar to the writing one, and you should be kind and patient with yourself. You should take regular breaks, you should take care of yourself while you're editing. You should make some notes and approach editing as not something so daunting, and just start working. I really hope you find this video useful, and I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on my new videos. Please let me know down in the comments, how do you feel about editing? Is it something you love? Is it something you dread? Is it something you avoid doing? And so on. Thank you once more for watching, and I really hope to see you all next time. Until then, have a smiley week. Bye!